Welcome everyone to On Time, On Target Financial Thought Leadership Series. We are so privileged today to have Chick Herbert with us, who has done all kinds of things. You heard that in his bio, but you can see a theme from somebody that was really kind of mature at a young age, who moved quickly into the coaching, mentoring, serving as a role model for others. And that's why I wanted to have him on the show today, so you can hear his story, hear his words of wisdom, and hopefully apply that to whatever situation that you're in. But I do have to say, you have to be a little bit honest, that I met Chick when I was a very young, impressionable 17-year-old, because we both went to Iowa State, and it was during rush week. So it was the week prior to starting school my freshman year. And I started rush, and I was bouncing around at the different events. And I remember meeting Chick and another Delta Upsilon fraternity brother, named Jeff Roseland, Rosie. And I swear to you, I looked at these guys, I talked to them for a few minutes, and I walked away, and I wondered if I was even good enough to be in this fraternity, because I was like, those are the guys I want to be when I grow up. So it was just an amazing role models, and made me want to join that fraternity, which I was very fortunate to have been asked later that week to join, and change my life for the better. So with that, Chick, welcome to the show. We've talked a few times in our careers, but it's finally good to have a sit-down interview with you, and it's just a privilege to have you on board. So why don't you start us out with some of your backstory type stuff, and let them get to know you. Go ahead.
Thanks, Steve. That's a flattering story. I'm not sure. Your listeners may question your character, because if they knew me, they may question whether you've got a good sense of that. But I really appreciate your kind words. That's very humbling, and a long time ago for both of us.
Yes.
A quick story, as you know, I do some speaking around the country, and I was at an event a couple of years ago, and I had my name tag on, Chick Herbert, and my name is spelled C-H-I-C-K. And a woman from Montreal came up to me, and she introduced herself, and she said, "Chic Herbert?" And I said, "Well, yeah.
The French version, yeah.
Yeah, that's the cool road name, but I'm actually Chick because I'm from Iowa." So I grew up in Iowa, went to Iowa State, was an engineer, as you were, and had a chance to go to work in California for some internship experience in Silicon Valley, which was really unique and fun.
Oh, I bet, yeah.
Then had the opportunity to go to work for Motorola, which was back in the day when it was really recognized as one of the great American companies, especially in the high-tech world, and competing against the Japanese, which at the time we were not doing very well as a country. And so it was a great experience, and learned a lot, but knew I didn't want to be an engineer by degree or by practice, even though I was by degree. It was a great place to learn. And I had a chance to come and work for a small consulting firm. And I was 26 at the time. And I was standing up in front of people that were twice my age, with twice the pedigree, if not 8 times the pedigree. And working about, I'd say 15 or 16 different industries. And then within those industries with all different functions. So whether it was working with their sales teams, their accounting teams, their marketing teams. And it was a really unique time where I had an incredible mentor that I was working for, who just invested a significant amount in me. And so to be 26, and I did that for 5 years, it really accelerated my development and my career, and exposed me to a lot of great leaders that I could emulate and pick and choose the things that I thought were effective in how they led their teams and how they interacted with other people. So that was a great time. And then I had a shift where, and my focus in that role was to work with the executive team on educating them on some of the principles that we were espousing, and to identify where in the company they had issues that they wanted to improve. And then I worked with their employees to teach them the problem-solving model and the tools that we were using. And then I would coach their teams as they would apply those tools and that knowledge to solve those problems. So it was a really interesting job, because I got to work at the senior level, where you had this higher altitude vantage point of the organization. And then I got to drill down in and really understand the nuts and bolts of how businesses worked on the front line. Did that for about 5 years, and then had a chance to go to I really wanted to apply what I had learned. So it's fun to coach other people. But at the same time, I had learned so much, I thought I want to go back into a business and apply all this to something that I can have ownership around instead of just coming and going.
Right.
And did that for about 7 years, where I was the chief operating officer of a mid-size company that had about 110 employees over 3 locations. And it was another great experience. I've been very blessed in each of my stops to do things that I really enjoy doing.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that with us. And thinking back to, as an engineer as well, I never did actually make it into an engineering job because I went into the military and was very blessed to be able to fly airplanes. And then I just was thinking about Motorola in Chicago. It seems like we had such a large Chicago contingent in our fraternity house. There were a lot of folks going back at that area and working for Motorola, especially the engineering types, if you will. But one thing you said there really kind of made me think as well is you talked about the mentoring you had as an early age. And I think that's so critical because I was very fortunate to have mentors in the fraternity, whether they knew they were mentoring me or not. And that's interesting because now kind of on the other end, you don't realize who's taking notes off of off of what you're saying and doing all the time, but it's true. And that's why I wanted to bring out this leadership series so people could learn. But yeah, mentoring at a young age and getting you and have their trust in you to get you to the front of the room and talking in front of folks, that is just really invaluable experience. So thank you for sharing that with us. And then that's interesting that you brought up you kind of wanted to go out of coaching into the doing, from a coach back to an operator or back onto the field. So that is pretty cool. And I just love that story. The next step kind of in your journey was you spent a significant amount of time at Wells Fargo. And for the listeners, you're going to hear that, global sales team, leadership development, strategy team, those are positions that you don't just get to do if you can't back it up with your expertise and your wisdom and your ability to really sort through the weeds and look at the big picture. So tell us about your time at Wells Fargo.
Well, it was significant and had a huge impact on my career from a development perspective. So I went from a company that had 100 people and maybe revenue of $25 million to a company at the time that had 140,000 people. Right. And then when Wells Fargo acquired Wachovia, we went to about 280,000 people and revenue of $10 billion. And so actually, I'm sorry, revenue of about $50 billion and profit of around $5 billion. So just when I first went, the zeros in the numbers were just mind-boggling. But whether it's a large, small, public, private, family-owned, doesn't matter. Running an organization and being a leader in an organization really comes down to the same fundamentals regardless of where it is. And I would say the military, I've got 2 sons that are veterans, certainly didn't achieve the things that you did in your distinguished career, but it did give me an appreciation of military leadership. I've had the opportunity to speak to several military groups about leadership, which was really intimidating to me to walk into a group full of people in their camos, their ACUs, because I thought, what am I going to talk about that they have any interest in? But that's the fun part, is that transfers. So I was recruited to Wells to run a global sales team. And that's a fancy thing, but essentially you commented on going from the consulting and the coaching into a business. Well, this was taking me a little bit into both. So I was an employee of Wells, but I worked across about a 25,000 person organization that had 10 different line of businesses. And my job was to go in and help them be more effective at selling. And the strategy that we used was not to come in and say, this is how you need to do it. The strategy was to come in and ask questions to get them to recognize the way they were doing it may not have been that strategic. So if you had a sales territory that was Texas, I might say, hey, Steve, tell me about how you carve out your week. who gets your
Right.
time and attention and your energy? Well, I usually just do a big loop around the state, and we'd call it lobbing donuts. I'll go see Jim because Jim's been a customer for a long time, and Chick's office is just across the street, so I'll just stop there. And there wasn't any sense of strategy. And
Right.
so from that, the whole intent was to get them to recognize that themselves without us having to beat it over their heads, but then to continue to ask questions so that we could develop a sales playbook. So let's indoctrinate the best practices and figure out how we can all be more effective. So I did that for about 3.5 years, which again, I was really blessed to have someone that was outside of the company that Wells Fargo had hired to basically be our outside expert. And my job was to ultimately become him. And so
Okay.
second person who just invested a lot in me and that I spent a lot of time on the road with, which if you've traveled with people as you have for
Right.
in your military experience, you build close bonds.
Sure.
So I did that. And then I had an interesting opportunity where I was asked to apply for a job that would be in HR. And that wasn't my aspiration, but what was really cool about it was responsible for the leadership development strategies and methods, and then the talent planning for about a 60,000 person organization. And so talent planning or talent management, essentially, if we look at the CFO of the mortgage company, which is a huge job, who are the people that we see next in line that have the capacity to be a future CFO? And what are we
Right.
doing to get them ready? And how do we strategically move them around to different roles so that we can broaden their foundation and elevate them into this really important role? So it was another opportunity where I was with really smart people, a lot smarter than me. And in these conversations and able to observe their thinking and how they thought about talent, how they thought about leadership. And so really enjoyed that. And then the third stint that I had for the last 5 years at Wells Fargo was to go back into a business and on the executive team. And my job was strategy. It was our digital innovation. How do we improve the customer experience, especially from a mobile or a web perspective? You may hear people talk about friction. How do you reduce the friction
Sure.
in the user
Mm-hmm.
experience? So a really fun job that was client facing to our big commercial clients as well as to our consumers. So, and all along the way, I've always played a big role in leadership development programs or diversity inclusion programs. I just enjoy helping other people be successful and help them figure out how to use their tools and their natural talents to elevate their performance and engagement.
Sure. Those your leadership experiences and training others and trying to mentor younger folks as they move up sounds just like the military, trying to expose everybody to different things so that way out of that growth pattern your next generation of leaders emerges. So it sounds like from all these experiences that you've had, the ones before and the ones at Wells Fargo, really set you up perfectly for consulting, on your own, because you've got such a breadth of knowledge. And again, it's not being the smartest person in the room, but it's being able to focus all of the people to get them pointed towards one objective or one goal. But before we start talking about your consulting and of course your book, we'll get to that. You did 9 years with the Special Olympics on the board, and you have a fantastic story about that. So if you would like to share that, we'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'd love to share it. It's one of my great passions. And my story of getting involved in Special Olympics is not typical. Most of the other people that I served, the majority of the people on the board that I served with initially were parents, siblings of people that had intellectual disabilities or special needs. I didn't have that personal connection. I actually volunteered with people with disabilities in high school. But what got me to Special Olympics is my best friend had 3 boys. His middle son was born and had severe physical and intellectual disabilities. And they were just getting him exposed to Special Olympics. And Tom was set to be the board chair for Special Olympics Iowa, which is where I live. And Tom was tragically killed in a small plane crash. He owned an advertising agency and was flying back from a pitch that they did in Indiana on a twin engine turboprop. The plane went down, the pilot and the 4 people from Tom and 3 of his folks from his company were all killed. And It was a really tragic. I was 39 at the time, remember it like it was yesterday. And someone contacted me and asked if I would be interested in serving on the board and replacing Tom on the Special Olympics board. And I thought, what a cool way to remember my friend, to honor him, but more importantly, to honor and help his son, who now had a lot of challenges in life and no father.
Yeah. Right.
And so it's been really fun. I've done about everything you can do in Special Olympics. Because I've had a lot of jobs, some people would say I can't keep a job, but I do know a lot of people. And so I used my relationships to help on the fundraising side. And one of the cool events that we did was called Over the Edge. And if you volunteered and raised $1,000, you got to rappel off the financial center in downtown Des Moines, which was 27 stories and 350 feet. And I think I did that maybe 16 times over 10 years that we did that. So it just was a great experience, because if you've ever been to an event with Special Olympic athletes, you know that they just get pure joy out of the opportunity to be treated like everyone else and to compete. And so it's hard to go away without an improved view of the world, and not to count your blessings because you're able-bodied or you don't have disabilities, but just to count your blessings because you've been exposed to people that get so much joy out of simple things, which we often don't do.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for sharing the personal story there, as well as the fun story. So thank you for your service. I mean, that's true service when you volunteer to take on a job like that. And what a cool tribute of a tragic situation to your friend. And I share your same sentiments. I was at early 90s. I was up in Rapid City, South Dakota, kind of against my will. It's not where I wanted to go in the military, but they don't ask a lot of times. And I worked with the Ski for Light program. When you remember George Senior's 1,000 Points of Light, and taking disadvantaged folks down in sleds down a mountain. And it was amazing because this was something that was on my calendar, and I was like, I know I want to be a part of it, but it was kind of work, and then run up the mountain. And for every single person I dealt with, it was their Super Bowl. It was their annual biggest event on their calendar. And just to see the excitement when you would show up, and it's just like, gosh, I hope I'm not late. And then kind of running out there, and you just see somebody just lit up with exuberance. It's just like, wow. And I get to be a part of that. So I know what you're saying there. So that's thank you for sharing that.
Well, and Steve, if I could, one of the coolest experiences and success stories of my career is with a young man whose name is Tyler Leach. Tyler is now 20, I would guess he's 26 or 27. I met Tyler as a Special Olympic athlete when he was 10, and have been a mentor to him for the last dozen or so years. And Tyler needed to do a job shadow. He was getting his associate's degree at a community college, and asked if I could get him a job shadow. So I arranged for him to come into our business at Wells Fargo. He shadowed 2 different people, went great. Then he called and said, hey, I need a summer internship. Could I get a job at Wells Fargo? And I said, well, we've got an intern program. Why don't you come and apply? So he applied, and we hired him. And I talked to his mom and said, we've got other interns from all over the country. Do you think it's okay to put Tyler in with them? Because they're going to do lunch and learns. They're going to get exposed to a lot of stuff. And I don't want to overwhelm him. She said, he's never failed, so let's do it. So Tyler became the glue of that internship group. I mean, they all rallied around Tyler. And then Tyler needed a job. And so he came and interviewed for a job, got the job on his own merits, not because of me, and went to a team that BMWs, bitchers, moaners, and whiners. There were a lot of people that just didn't see the world in a great light. But when Tyler came in, he actually outperformed people on the team with the metrics. But he also really changed the culture because people stopped complaining about the little stuff and really appreciated how Tyler approached his life and all that he had accomplished with all the challenges that he faced. So it was a really, really cool story. And Tyler just celebrated, I think he's been there 4 years now,
Oh,
and has
fantastic.
been promoted a couple of times. So it's a really cool story.
Yeah, it sure is. It certainly helps keep things in perspective, especially you're right, when you can kind of let the little things in life kind of wear on you when zooming out and getting a big perspective like that can change everything. So thank you for sharing. Where I want to transition next with our talk is you wrote a book, and I want you to talk about that story, kind of when you first thought about it, talk about your co-author, what's the book about, and maybe some of the finances, since it is a finance show, of behind the book, and for anybody that's thinking about writing a book out there, and how much money you're either going to make or not make. So go ahead, tell us about the experience.
Oh, write a book. No, I'm kidding. Write a book for the right reasons. So the book was something that I was doing a lot of public speaking, both inside of Wells Fargo. I would get asked to speak at national leadership conferences or whatever it may be. And I love to be up in front of people. I love to try and influence people in a positive way to think differently. And I was also doing some outside speaking, and I would go to events as a participant as well. And I was at an event, actually at the Naval Academy, and open to civilians. And my boss at the time, who was my co-author of the book, said, "How's the conference?" And I said, it's good. I think I could do a better job and have a better story than what I'm hearing people. And that's my big ego talking. You always think you can do it better. And so he shot a text back and said, "Want to write a book?" And that was the big strategic, brilliant moment. And I'm like, yeah, I actually do want to write a book, because I'd had a number of people that were saying the things that I was talking about, you ought to package that together and write a book about it so that you can help other people, because people received a lot of value. So in short, the book, it's over my shoulder. It's called It Begs the Question. And it is about, as a leader, your job is not to tell everybody what to do. Your job is to build capacity in other people so that you can improve your position of leverage and focus on the more strategic things in the organization. And that doesn't matter if you're a frontline manager or a senior manager. Your job is not to do the work of your team. Your job is, what I say, to work on the system and improve the overall environment so your team can be more successful. Which all sounds really simple, but that's not how most leaders spend their time. They're constantly reacting to the barrage of things. And the most powerful way, from our research and work and experience, is by asking good questions. So instead of telling somebody what to do, instead of telling you how you're going to do your sales strategy for Texas, it's, "Steve, tell me about how you're thinking about strategy for Texas. Where do you see, what's your ideal customer profile look like? How are you going to get to that customer? How will you approach them? All those things." And so that's what the book is about. And the one thing, from a financial perspective, there are different paths. The book is 6 years old now. It was 2014. The world's changed tremendously in 6 years. It's pretty easy to write a book and self-publish and print on demand to multiple printers. So it's an entirely different thing. When we first started writing the book, it was coming out of the recession. And unless you were Colin Powell and had an audience that was national with, a YouTube channel, it was difficult to get big mainstream publishers to invest. So we did a lot of it on our own. We were kind of in between self-published and publishing house. But it's a long process. It's a humbling process. We easily could have quit about 10 times. We've certainly made money. If you look at the hourly rate, when you factor it all in, don't know what that would be. We've sold, I would guess, over 10 to 11,000 books, which I'm really proud of. We created an audio book. We did an ebook. So in every step of that process, it was just a tremendous learning opportunity from a marketing perspective, from a website development perspective, a distribution perspective. So you're essentially, you're launching a business. And so I've got a couple of LLCs that I manage. one for the book, and then with my co-author and all the associated materials, and then one for my consulting and speaking business. So even I'm really proud of the book. I mean, I think it's a very good book. It's a simple read. We call it a 2 airplane ride book. So if you're flying across the country, you could probably finish the book. But the feedback has been that it's very practical. It's giving you things that you can put into practice in the very next coaching conversation that you have with someone on your team. And that's how I really like theory, but if I can't do anything with it, it's not valuable to me.
Right. Well, that sounds good. Are you planning a revision in the future, or another book, or undecided on what the future might hold?
It's a great question. Undecided at this point, it would be the short answer. We've done 3 revisions, and so in each reprint, we've made slight modifications, but not a big overhaul. But the hard part is, and with your success, I don't know you well enough at this stage in your career, but I'm a perfectionist, and it's really hard to be a perfectionist when you write a book because it's never done. You always want to
just run out of time. Yeah.
Well, and you never run out of time because you could kick the can forever. So there's so many people out there with new books and all this. I don't want to just go through it to do another one. It's got to be, what's that unique niche that blends in with this one? And we've got some ideas, but it's a lot of work, and I'm old.
I bet. And did you, when you go to speak, do you carry a few with you, or did you at the beginning and you don't do that anymore, or kind of hand them out? Or
yeah, that's a great question. A lot of times when I would speak, the organization would buy, so if I'd be speaking to 500 people, they'd buy 500 copies, and they would give them out to everybody who attended. And then it was really odd and humbling, and still is odd and humbling, when people say, "Hey, will you sign my book?" And I kind of look around like, who are you talking to?
There's an author around here somewhere, right?
Exactly. I'm proof that anybody can write a book. So in most cases, the organization will purchase them, or in some cases, they'll have me ship them to the hotel or event, and then people have the option to purchase from them on site. But we've got a website, and again, the goal isn't to make $1 bazillion. It really is just to give people practical tools that they can use to become more successful.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing now.
The other piece about the book is I have taken vacation from my day job to go do my second job. I've done that for about 8 years now. So when I go speak, I would take vacation and I'd fly to Arizona and I'd speak at a national sales meeting, and I'd fly home the next night and get home at midnight. So essentially have 2 jobs, but I left Wells Fargo. My co-author was actually named the CEO of the company I work for now, which is called NCMIC. And he had contacted me when he was named CEO and said, "Hey, I'd like you to come in and do some of your work, both around the book as well as some other things in their sales organization." And so I did 1 gig, and then I did another gig, all while working at Wells and all while taking vacation. And ultimately they said, "Why don't you just come to work here? We don't have anybody. It's a 220 person organization. We don't have anybody that looks like you, that has kind of the breadth and the things that you can do." And so I was really blessed where they created a role for me, and I get to do all the things that I've talked to you about so far in this interview. It's a blended role that was created specifically for me. And so I'm doing strategy. I'm running big strategic initiatives. I'm working with our sales teams to become more effective sellers. I'm working with our leadership management committee to help them become more effective leaders. I'm working on our diversity inclusion. I'm co-hosting a new podcast that we're starting.
There you go. Yeah.
So it's everything from plunging the toilets to shoveling snow. But that's the kind of job I like, where it's got a lot of breadth.
Oh, very nice. And then along the way, we figured out that we had a common experience. And again, I think it was through another fraternity brothers of ours posted some pictures of being on an aircraft carrier. So I was fortunate enough to do that it's been an overnight kind of deal. So, but Chick, tell us about your experience doing that.
Well, Steve, it was the coolest. Well, next to my wedding day and the birth of my three sons, it was one of the coolest things I've ever
Right.
gotten to do. So at Leaders at Sea, and I had to get myself to Pensacola, or no, I'm sorry, to Jacksonville, Florida, Jacksonville Naval Air Station. And I had the opportunity to fly out to the USS Eisenhower, which was doing war games in the Atlantic. And it was about 90 miles off the coast. So we flew out in a Greyhound and did
Yeah.
the tailhook landing and spent 24 hours aboard during war games. And it was the most incredible experience in 24 hours of my life. We could take pictures everywhere except one of the tactical war rooms where they had all the screens up. The only thing we didn't see was the reactor, which was just fine with me. But we, it was fully staffed. So I think there were 85 aircraft on board, 5,000 sailors. They served 20,000 meals a day. They had a 85-bed hospital with 2 surgical suites. When I landed, one of the sailors said, "Welcome to the Mighty Ike, sir. You just landed at the world's busiest airport. So you know
nice.
more about this than I do, but every 35 to 40 seconds, they either launched or recovered an F-18 or a Hornet or a Super Hornet. And that just went 24 hours a day. And we got to be on deck. We got to be up in Vulture's Row on the conning tower at night, watching these things come in, and got to spend time with pilots like you. And it really was. It was an amazing experience. And to see all these young people doing this work on this ship was just humbling and amazing to experience. And then, of course, the cat shot off the next day, where you go from 0 to 200 in about 1.7 seconds. That was kind of fun too.
Yeah, and you're hanging out there over the water like, that's interesting. Well, I share pretty much across the board the same reaction. And but I will say from a military operations perspective, obviously in the flying business, lots of rules, lots of precision, very efficient, amazing to watch any flying operation. But on a carrier, it takes that to the next level. And where we get excited in the Air Force, if our wingtips are within, 6 feet of each other, people are going to start slowing down and noticing, and almost, like, what's going on. Well, they have airplanes with overlapped wings and landing and taking off. Just amazing. So nothing but complete respect for the Navy and their view on efficient operations. It was amazing. And of course, first class, I was on a VIP tour as well. So got to meet the captain and sit in the chair and watch it all. Yeah. It's just like, okay, I'm proud to be an American. This machine right here, it'll make somebody think twice about doing something wrong out there. So,
well, I felt the same way. I was so proud to be an American, and the ship had just come out of dry dock, where I think it was a 2-year refurbishment process, and they did the new rods and the nuclear reactor. And I asked the commander, I said, "So how long will this how long until it needs to go back into dry dock?" And he said, "With the reactor, it'll be 30 years. And that'll, 30 years of propulsion for the ship, water generation, electrical generation, all of that," which is just amazing to me. And what I use my story, and I've, as you can imagine, have about 8 million pictures of my 24 hours aboard. But I use it in a lot of my keynotes to start off. And I talk about at the time I was in the leadership development role for Wells Fargo. So I was trying to learn what the Navy did to develop leaders that I could take back to a corporation. And the things that I always talk about was the reason for the war games. From a leadership perspective, people think you need to send your employee to training. And if I send them to training, then that's their development. And I fundamentally disagree. It's important, but if you don't follow that up with coaching and you don't wrap real world experience around it, you're going to lose everything that you just invested in that person, because they're going to come back, and if they don't use it, it's just gone. And that, as I was talking to the people in the Navy, that's the whole idea of war games, which I'm sure you've participated in plenty, because you can't simulate duress and high pressure situations in a classroom like you can in a simulation. And that's something that I have tried to bring in from an experiential learning perspective, into businesses and consulting clients that I work with. So how do you tap into the learning that you get just from this really hard project that you just launched? Because usually we're off to the next project. We don't stop and reflect on what we did learn through that difficult process, which is where the real learning begins.
Right. No, I agree with you. And when I speak, it's usually about flying in combat, and folks say, "Were you nervous flying over Baghdad and being in shock and awe?" And I said, "Well, not really. I was nervous when I got out of bed that morning, but by the time I showed up at work, I'm in the same training that I have literally done 1,000 times."
Yep.
And oh, by the way, yeah, when you see the real bullets and real missiles, you're like, okay, yeah, it's plenty real. But you're so focused on just executing the mission and doing everything like you've trained to do literally 1,000 times. So that is a great perspective to have. From all of the things that you've done, which is very broad, if you were to go back and mentor a 25-year-old chick, or if you were in a room and where you had 1,025 to 35-year-olds in front of you who wanted to know what your words of wisdoms are, what would you tell that crowd?
I would tell the crowd to be quick to raise your hand for opportunities that may seem outside of your comfort zone and beyond your capabilities, because that's where the learning and growth happens. And I would tell people to invest in relationships. Especially in today's world where things are so virtual, life still comes down to how effective you can collaborate with other people, how you can influence people that you don't have any authority over. In my current job, I have the least authority that I've ever had. My team is very small. I could care less. I'm having more fun and my influence is broader than it's ever been because I can do just about anything on any given day. But all of that, I wouldn't be in the position that I'm in, and I wouldn't have had each of those progressions if I didn't have relationships with other people that allowed me that opportunity. And so too often I think young people, come in and they want to accelerate really fast, which isn't always reasonable. And then the second is they just do the work, but they don't invest in the relationship. So putting your head down and plowing through stuff is great. But if you're not asking questions, if you're not engaging with other people, if you're not taking time to get to know Steve, who works across the office from you, you're missing the boat, because ultimately it's going to come back where they're going to say, "What do you think of Chick?" "Well, I don't know. He doesn't really talk to anybody. He doesn't engage with anyone." And it doesn't matter how smart you are. So I'm a big believer that emotional intelligence trumps intelligence, and intelligence is really important, but it's not the most important thing. It's how do you read people? How do you come across? How do people perceive you? Do you have people that will give you honest feedback about how you're perceived? Or do they just say, "Oh yeah, no, you're doing fine"? And all of that comes back to relationships.
Okay, well, I think those are just fantastic words to live by. And I hope you do get that audience of 1,000 young folks all the time just to say those words to and really help change their lives. Before I close, for those that either want to hear more from you, or how can they get a hold of you, or if they wanted to book you or listen to your podcast, share some of that information, if you will, and so people can get to know a little bit more about you.
Sure. Well, first, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And more importantly, thanks for your service. I mean that sincerely. Steve knows this, but the audience doesn't. I have 2 sons that served out of my 3 boys, and one was deployed to Afghanistan for 12 months. And while I've always appreciated those that serve, being a parent of someone in harm's way certainly puts a different perspective and appreciation. So thank you. And I mean that bottom of my heart. You could reach me LinkedIn. It's Chick Herbert, and I don't think there are a lot of us out there. Or you could look at Chic Hebert. Probably gets me too. I'm on Twitter at Chick Herbert, and my email is CHICK, so chick.herbert2@gmail.com. And then the last thing, I do have a website. It's not super fancy, but for my speaking and the book, it's Question-Centric Coaching.com.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that. And again, I'll put that information in our show notes so people can refer back to that. And Chick, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thanks for being the good role model that you are, and good husband and good father. And thanks for mentoring me as a 17-year-old that was probably a little too cocky than I needed to be, and I needed much mentoring from you and our fraternity brothers to kind of make me a better version of myself to send me out in the world. And you guys did that. So thanks for being on today. For our listeners, thank you so much for listening in. I hope you got just a ton of information from Chick today about all his fantastic experiences, and that you can apply that to whatever your challenges are in your life as you go forward in your particular careers. So thanks for listening, and here's to all of you staying on time, on target with your career and financial goals. Bye.